Hi there, welcome to Camera Peeps. In this episode, we have invited a colleague of ours, Andre, onto the show.
David, yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, Andre, we are going to wind back the clock a bit in terms of camera technology and talk about some really old cameras. And you just happen to be the custodian and owner of this particular camera we've got up on the screen now.
Yes, I've had that camera for many years, since I was 17 years old, in fact.
Really? Okay, we'll get on to that. So what is this camera? Can you please, I know what it is, but can you just please explain?
It's a Marconi Mark IV. They were brought into Australia around about 1960. The predecessor was a Mark III, and that pioneered the start of Australian television.
Yep.
And the Mark IV is an improved version, and works a little bit better in low light. It's a bit more compact, and just like everything, it just has a few improved features.
Fair enough. This particular camera has a bit of history to it in this country?
It does, yeah. This particular one came from Melbourne, and it was in the Teletheatre, which was run by Channel 7 originally.
Okay.
And it covered a lot of live variety shows in the life at the Teletheatre. In some TV shows it was even featured on an episode of Homicide as part of one of their crime stories. Amazing.
We'll just go to another picture. There's another shot of it. Of course, something that stands out here, of course, is this is pre-zoom lenses. So are you able to just run us through?
Yeah, back in the day when this camera came out, zoom lenses weren't really perfected. They were still trying to get that right. So in order to get the different focal distances, they had 4 lenses. So you had 4 options: close, near, far, and in between. So as the zoom lens was developed, they eventually found that they could make one that would fit on the bottom turret of the camera. So that meant that the other 3 lens turrets or mountings were blocked off. So that meant that you had a mechanical zoom option if you needed it. But that came out sort of later, and they were very expensive because it was new technology at the time.
So so from the camera operator's point of view, I'll just go to the next shot. Well, there's another shot of the lenses. This particular side shot here. So you would change the...
Yeah, the handle that's seen on the side, that would actually turn the turret around.
There's two. Okay, so it's the one up the top.
Yep,
right?
The top handle.
Okay.
And the rotary knob down below was for the zoom. For the focus. Yep. So that actually physically brought the orthicon tube, which picks up the picture, backwards and forwards to get it into focus with the lens. So the top handle, you would turn that around, and that would give you different focal distances. Now, back in the control room, the director had to be very clear as to which camera was online, because there'd be at least 3 in most cases, and you'd have to make sure that the camera online was not adjusted. The others could freely adjust the focal range to set up the next shot.
Yeah, you had to be on top of your game.
Absolutely, yeah. So on the odd occasion in some of those live shows, you could see where the communication might have got a bit mixed up, and you'd occasionally see like a porthole as the turret went around to the next lens.
Wow.
So that was a big no-no.
Okay, fair enough. And there's a shot of you operating that camera, so that just gives a bit of scale. It's actually it's a bit of a beast.
And they were very big, heavy things. And if you were sitting like we are in a set, and that came towards you very quickly to get a tracking shot, it was it was a bit sort of, distressing to see something so big coming towards you.
Yeah.
But that was the ultimate technology. Now, the weight in that, it took just the bottom part of that pedestal, took at least 3 people to lift it up. It would be about nearly half a tonne in weight. It was massive.
Wow.
So that was the studio pedestal, but there was also an outside broadcast portable tripod arrangement as well.
Now, speaking of pedestals, I can't help but bring this up. We actually have, people who are eagle-eyed will notice that's a pretty old pedestal. I actually have one here because I also try and collect a bit of the old gear as well. I'm using it to hold up the plasma TV there, but you have a couple of those pedestals?
I've got 3 of them.
Yeah, okay.
I actually have 3 different generations of these cameras.
Okay.
And to make it look authentic, you need the pedestal to go with it.
But there's another weird thing about those pedestals. They're actually made in Brisbane.
Yeah.
This one here, I should actually check some engineering company in Brisbane. Yeah. I've Googled it. I don't think it exists anymore, but they were possibly made under license or something.
Yeah, I think that one's an ITE one, which is...
Yeah, okay. I know this one here is definitely made in Brisbane, some engineering.
Yeah, and then one of the ones I have definitely is made in Brisbane.
Okay.
So I don't know why they were made up there, but they made them very well.
Fair enough. And I was just going to ask you a bit about the Marconi company, because obviously it's a name we don't hear very often anymore. I guess they're no longer in business. Italian name, but they're actually...
Yeah, they're in England. They're
Yes.
an English company.
Yeah.
And they were sort of in competition with Pi, which was another major company that made cameras. And you also had the European ones, the Philips. So they sort of, all three of those companies were competing to make cameras.
Yeah, great.
So
Another big question. Does this 60-year-old camera still work?
it can.
Okay.
If you're very patient, it will work.
Now that is amazing. That is amazing.
Not like today, where you just plug cameras in and off they go. That required at least 4 hours to heat up, stabilise, because the electronics, it's all valve driven.
Yep.
The tolerances would change due to heat and warming up. So
Mhm.
that's what would happen in the days when that was set up in the studios.
Yep.
Is there'd be an early morning crew would come in at about 4 o'clock in the morning and
Mhm.
turn those cameras on, so they were fully functioning by 8 a.m. for
Yep.
example, say on a weekend, and they were able to do the fine adjustments. There was a lot of fine adjustments that were required that we wouldn't even think of today, and that was just to get a black and white picture.
Amazing. So Andre, these aren't just for us to look at. These cameras actually still get used in a way.
They do, yeah. I've got a few bits and pieces. VidFilm, the company that I run,
Yes.
sends these cameras out on location.
Yes.
They've appeared in a lot of retro television shows in the last few years on the various television networks in Australia. To keep things authentic, a lot of studio shots, you'll often see them pop up, and even on location for outside broadcasting. So they still have a bit of a life in them yet.
I can imagine. I guess when the TV stations turfed them out, they had no idea, really, because these things are actually like you can't. They're actually priceless. Not in that they're worth a lot of money. They're actually priceless because you just can't buy these.
Well,
things.
back in the day, the technology was just made redundant. It was mainly because of the
Yep.
black and white issue.
Yep.
But these days, they're black and white. They're very hard to move.
Mm.
They're not widescreen. They're not
Yeah.
high definition. So it just means simply they're just useless, and they take up a lot of space. So
But retro is in.
retro is in, absolutely. And you might be surprised where you might see them turn up next.
Fair enough. All right, so we'll just go on to the next one. So here's another model, Marconi. This is another camera out of your collection.
That's correct, yes.
And we have a bit of a Where's Wally situation. No one's actually ever commented on the videos we've been doing. There's actually 2 of these cameras under the desk here. I have 2 of these, and I
Right,
actually
so
store
we're
them under
actually
here.
being held together by Mark8 cameras.
That's right. So anyhow, so this is another one from your collection. So
Yes.
can you just run us through?
Yeah, well, this is a Mark8. This was the first of the generation in colour that we got here for some of the networks. It is made by the same company. It's basically the same sorts of. It's got different types of tubes in it.
What sort of era, or what sort of?
Oh, we're looking
Yeah.
early 70s, but by the time Australia really went to colour, it was probably the mid 70s, around 1975, when they were doing a lot of test broadcasts. They did get them a couple of years earlier, but they started to get regular use around about 1975, and that's where they really started to take place, and they were used right up until 2000.
Wow. Okay. So which networks in Australia would have been using these?
The 7 network had some. A couple of the other networks actually used them as well.
And some of the regionals.
Yeah, some of the regionals.
Because I noticed when I
used them.
see those, when people post those photos, the old studio photos,
Yeah.
9 had the Bosch Furniture cameras.
Yeah, there was Bosch,
Yep.
there was Philips,
Yep.
and there was even Sony in some places, and Marconi. There was quite a lot of Marconi Mark8 cameras, especially in the 7 network for outside broadcasting. There was quite a lot of them, and
Okay.
they proved to be a very successful
Yeah, okay.
camera.
Okay. I spoke to a studio camera guy who used to operate these cameras, and he's not a big fan, or he wasn't a big fan of using these cameras for whatever reason. He didn't qualify, but they are pretty big and bulky, and an unusual design too, the way the lens is.
Yeah,
Like integrated
it's
into-
unlike the previous camera. You have got one lens, and
Yeah.
they had various zoom lenses that were used.
Yeah.
Like for football games and things, you needed a really good
Yeah.
heavy-duty lens that
Yes.
could zoom in a long way. That seemed to be very successful, but as were the other cameras.
Yep.
But this one in particular just seemed to suit those applications.
Yeah, okay. And what have we got here? I just noticed you've got a very authentic, or recreated a very authentic setup here with the notes, with the notepad on the side of the camera here.
Well, basically what would happen there is the cameraman would have a rundown of what the show was, and he would flip through, no laptops, just literally by page, flip through the program. So it would usually be timed out with suggested camera moves or how the show was running. And sometimes that order might go completely out, and it'll just be purely through the headset from the director saying, right, well, we're now going to go to this bit. So it was just a sort of a thing to glance across to and just sort of have a look and say, well, you know, this is where we are, and keep on track with things.
And another thing I might just point out, with the power supply and the CCU for this camera is probably bigger than this, takes up more space than this camera itself.
It's a fair amount. It's a full rack mount size piece of equipment. It would be, you know, like probably about, if you're talking in inches, probably about 12 to 15 inches in height in a standard rack mount, 19-inch rack mount system.
So we can't just plug a 4-pin 12-volt in and an SDI
Unfortunately, you can't. No, it's a multi-core cable. That was another thing with some of these cameras. They had triac cables or multi-core. This was a multi-core one, and basically it just went back to the CCU, and that basically what the difference is with that is it's with the triac, it's just a code that sends information backwards and forwards. The multi-core, each pin in the plug, which would have many pins, would actually command different functions.
Okay.
So it's just a different way of doing it, but the triac cables were more successful.
What sort of tubes and what size tubes did these?
Plomakin tubes,
which
are inside. The actual size, I don't have the dimensions with me, but the Plomakin tubes, like a lot of these cameras, they were very light sensitive, so you had to be very careful where you were shooting not to burn the tubes. That was often a common problem.
And the technical director
Well, technical director was...
they definitely earned their money in this era.
When you were setting up an actual production, the technical director or lighting person should have normally got together to make sure there wasn't any chance of lights going down the barrel of the camera to prevent this problem. So what would happen is the TD would sit in operating the CCU for the camera and make sure that the light levels are correct to prevent as much as possible. But you used to get a lot of problems, so you might get, say, a chrome microphone stand reflecting the 2K light straight into that, which would cause comet tailing and burning, and that was just a problem with those tube cameras.
I noticed some of the, I've seen on TV some of the contemporary young bands, I've seen them actually go out of their way to source tube cameras to do their clips, so it actually looks like the 1970s just to have the comet tailing, etc.
Yeah, no, it was a major problem, the comet tailing, and usually low light it was even worse because the iris was open bore, so therefore it was more vulnerable to flares and comet tailing off highlighted subjects.
Okay, the new generation of cinematographers and camera people don't know how good they've got it.
No,
really.
Well, another big problem talking those sorts of cameras, if you had like a press conference where you had people with camera flashes coming up, and the camera flashes would just burn out the tubes. You just couldn't do anything about it. These days, you don't have to worry about it.
Well, I remember the camera that's behind you, I used to use that camera, and I remember as a standard practice, every time we moved the camera, we actually capped the lens off.
You'd do your best, or if you did have a burn, there was the option of opening up the iris and trying to burn the burn out with like white paper, but that meant the contrast eventually went in the tubes, and that was the end of it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. There's another angle of it. You've done a fantastic job sourcing all these parts, because just the lens shade, the camera number, etc. It's fantastic, because these parts would be very difficult.
We just can't get them. They just simply do not make them.
Right.
So it's really whatever turns up. I mean, you find parts in the most obscure places. Like it's usually people like myself that collect things. They might have a part off something, and that would be the very bit you'd want. I mean, if something might turn up on the second-hand market, but it's very unlikely.
So this camera has this appeared in the background of a...
It has appeared in a few different programs.
That's great. 1970s, obviously.
For the era, sort of between the 70s and 80s mainly, and maybe into the 90s, because they were used for a good 20 years as a good workhorse sort of studio camera.
Great.
So,
all right, and here's another one from your collection. This is just one of the lenses.
So that is a very big zoom lens. That would be the sort of thing that you would put in the MCG or a football ground.
OB,
and want it
basically.
outside broadcast, you
yeah.
would never use that in a studio. So if you're up in a grandstand looking down with 20,000 people below you at a football match, for example, you could zoom right into the ball.
And I guess changing the lens was a two-person operation.
Absolutely,
well.
but you wouldn't change the lens. You'd sort of make the decision at the start of the game, because there'd be other cameras that would be the close-up follow camera with that lens.
Okay. All right, there's another shot of you, some publicity shots, because we took these photos. We haven't gone to the trouble of photoshopping them like we were meant to, but this is actually a side business.
Raw is good.
That's right. It's actually a side business of yours as well, so we just wanted to set...
as you can see, I'm perfectly dressed. That's how they would have been dressed back in the day. But
and we'll have the web address up for your business. I couldn't help that one. That's unfortunately couldn't do a selfie on that one because the distance and the bulk. But
I guess when you just look at that photo and you just think, how did they move these things around? And the skill for the cameraman was quite amazing. I mean, it wasn't, as you say today, they got it that easy. It was quite an effort to push these, even though they glided quite well. It was quite an effort to steer and stop them from running away
stopping
from
the one
you.
would have been the thing.
Yeah, and that's like when the talent was sitting there. You had to be very careful because you could easily lose control and knock someone out with it. So,
cause some damage.
Yeah.
All right. There's another shot. I think we're back to the start. So look, I think we'll leave it there, Andre.
Okay.
And thank you so much for coming.
That's okay. Pleasure being on the show.
No worries. And I hope people enjoy this presentation, because it is a pretty amazing era of technology that we just need a reminder of how good we've got it and how tough things actually were in the old days. I think we may be getting you on for a few more chats in the future. Thank you again,
All right,
and
thank you.
we'll see you next time.
All right, thanks.